Listen up, weed lovers. It's 420 month, and IndieCloud.co is here to elevate your celebration. Get a massive 42% off all weed, edibles, and vapes for the entire month of April in our biggest sale of the year. This is a special year to celebrate 420, as it marks 6 years since the sale of almost all cannabis products was legalized across the country. This allows IndieCloud to deliver to you dispensary-grade legal products discreetly delivered straight to your door. No medical card needed. IndieCloud has something for everyone. Whether you're a seasoned toker or just starting out, you can explore the world of weed safely with our award-winning Soda Shop Gummy Series, our 12 strains of flower, or our record-breaking selection of vapes. Celebrate 420 responsibly all April with IndieCloud. Discreet delivery, top-shelf products, all month long. Head over to indiecloud.co/spring24, that's C-O, not .com, to snag 42% off your first order.
American superstar that died too young? Or did he? Follow me down the rabbit hole about Elvis Presley. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about Elvis Presley. Thank you, Athen, for your request of this episode. So this is going to be a series because there are several of these that are said to have faked their deaths. So this is the first in a series of fake deaths that we're going to cover in the next couple weeks. So if you have requested a fake death or you have a request for a fake death, yes, I'm going to cover Tupac and Michael Jackson, and Paul Walker has been requested as well. So if you have any others outside of those guys, let me know. But let's get into Elvis. So Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8th of 1935 in Tupelo, Mississippi. His parents were Vernon and Gladys Presley, and Elvis actually was a twin, but unfortunately Jesse, who was his twin, was delivered stillborn. And so his mom would often say that he had the strength of two men, so him and his brother Jesse. But because of that death, Elvis was very close with his parents, and in fact, he was quite the mama's boy. The family attended an Assembly of God church, which is where he first found musical inspiration. And Vernon kind of made money just doing odd jobs, but that meant that the family didn't have much money. In 1938, Vernon was found guilty of altering a check, so he went to jail for 8 months. And this caused the family to lose their home, and Gladys and Elvis moved into a black neighborhood, which was all they could afford at the time. And this would greatly influence his music later, to the point where sometimes people would ask, like in his early days, if he was a white man or a black man, because they just assumed he was black because of the way he sang and the songs that he was singing. Elvis was like an average student. He never really stood out in any way, but his first public performance was at a singing contest at the Mississippi Alabama Fair and Dairy Show in October 1945. He was only 10 at the time, and he placed 5th, which was pretty good. And just a few months later, on his 11th birthday, he received his first guitar, which was really influential in his life because he wanted to learn how to make more music. So members of the community would give him guitar lessons, and this kind of was a theme throughout his life. Anytime they moved, somebody would always offer up guitar lessons for Elvis, which was really nice. When he went to middle school, he would sing and play his guitar around school, but this caused him to be teased and bullied. The kids said that he was a trashy kid who played hillbilly music, so that was a really good start for him. But he was a really big fan of Mississippi Slim's, and Slim had his own radio show, and Elvis was a huge fan, so he listened to that show constantly. And he also went to middle school with Slim's younger brother, and so that's how he ended up being taught by Mississippi Slim some chord techniques, and he even got to perform on Slim's radio show at the age of 12. In November of 1948, the Presley family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and this is where Elvis would call home the rest of his life. Every time he went anywhere, he came back to Memphis. He was in 8th grade at the time, and he was receiving a C in music because his teacher said he had no aptitude for singing, which is really funny when you think of Elvis Presley, right? But usually he was way too shy to perform at this point. So he wasn't performing regularly. He wasn't really pursuing music regularly. And even though they moved, he was still being bullied at school. This time, he was being bullied for being a mama's boy, like loving his mom too much. I don't know. I don't think you could ever love your mom too much. But anyway, in 1950, Elvis started guitar lessons with his neighbor Lee Dennison, and together with 3 other boys, they formed this like loose musical collective in the neighborhood. And 2 of these boys would go on to also be rockabilly pioneers with Elvis. Rockabilly, it's like rock and roll and hillbilly music combined. During his junior year in high school, Elvis started to grow out his sideburns and he started styling his hair, and this made him stand out in school. So like if he wasn't bullied already, I'm sure this did not help, right? Like he was already being bullied and now he's growing out his sideburns and styling his hair in a way that was not fashionable for the time. And he would often make trips to Beale Street, which is like the heart of Memphis and was like a thriving blues scene. But because it's a thriving blues scene, that means it's predominantly black musicians, which was totally okay with him because that was his scene, you know? He admired the flashy clothes people were wearing. So by his senior year, he started wearing those same flashy clothes, which probably didn't help with his sideburns and the whole bullying thing he's got going on. In 1953, he competed in the Hume's annual show, and this performance changed his reputation for the better. So Elvis is quoted saying, "I wasn't popular in school. I failed music. Only thing I ever failed. And then they entered me in this talent show. When I came on stage, I heard people kind of rumbling and whispering and so forth because nobody knew I even sang. It was amazing how popular I became in school after that." So this changed everything for him because they were like, oh, okay, so this is just part of his thing. But he couldn't read music. He just played music by ear, whatever he heard. He just like made it work with what he needed to do. He would go to the record stores that had jukeboxes and listening booths, and he would just like listen to songs and learn how to play them. He knew all of Hank Snow's songs and listened to other records such as Roy Acuff, Ernest Tubb, Ted Daffin, and Jimmy Rogers. It's Jimmy Rogers Snow, who is Hank Snow's son. He listened to Southern gospel singer Jake Hess, who had like this huge influence on him in his ballad singing. And he listened to radio stations that played spirituals, blues, and like modern backbeat heavy rhythm and blues. And although he attended blues venues on white-only nights because they were predominantly black, he was influenced by African-American musicians such as Arthur Cudrup and Rufus Thomas. And by the time he graduated high school in June of 1953, Elvis knew he was going to pursue music as a career. And later on, he's actually pretty good friends with B.B. King. In August 1953, Presley went to Memphis Recording Service, which was run by Sam Phillips before he started Sun Records, to record 2 songs. So from here on out, I refer to it as Sun Records because pretty shortly afterwards, he changed it to Sun Records. He claimed this was for his mom, like the 2 songs he was going to record was for his mom, but later revealed that he really wanted to know what he sounded like on a record. And a biographer stated that Elvis went to Sun Records in hopes of being discovered. So those first 2 songs, he was like, maybe somebody will hear me and realize that I'm amazing. In January 1954, he went back and recorded 2 more songs, still hoping to be discovered, with no such luck. Sun Records really focused on black musicians, but Sam Phillips knew that black musicians just didn't really sell at the time. So he was kind of looking for someone that would appeal to a broader audience, and Elvis kind of fit the bill. So in June 1954, Sam acquired a demo by Jimmy Sweeney singing Without You and thought that song might suit Presley, so he had him sing it, but unfortunately, Elvis just didn't do it justice. It just wasn't going to work. Luckily, Phillips still saw that potential in Elvis and invited a guitarist, Winfield Scotty Moore and an upright bass player, Bill Black, to work with him in this recording session. They didn't know like what was going to come of it. They were just like, let's see if we can make something stick. Throw everything at the wall, see what we can make stick. This recording session was almost completely useless. They were at it for hours. Finally, sometime late in the night, like around midnight, right before they were like, this is dumb. We should not do this anymore. Let's just call it what it is. It's not going to work. Elvis sang That's All Right by Arthur Crudup. They say that Elvis just began like jumping around and acting a fool, like really feeling the music, and the others just kind of like joined in. And Phillips, luckily, started recording because he knew that this was the sound that he had been looking for. And just 3 days later, it was played on Red Hot and Blue radio show, and people loved it. In fact, they loved it so much that the DJ just played it on repeat for the next 2 hours. Soon after, they interviewed Elvis on the show, and they had to ask him what high school he went to because nobody believed that he was a white musician. Everyone thought he was black. So when he stated what school he went to, everyone realized, oh, that's a whites only school. He has to be white. And so many people thought he was white. In the Elvis movie, they show Jimmy Rogers Snow playing this record for Hank Snow and for Colonel Thomas Parker. And at the time, they're like, oh, like, this guy's so good. And Colonel Parker is like, oh, we can't sign a black musician. He's like, he's not black, he's white. And that changed everything because Parker was the manager for Hank Snow and for Jimmy Rogers Snow. And he wanted to expand his repertoire as well. So he was very excited when he first heard Elvis. So anyway, the three of them went back and they recorded Blue Moon of Kentucky in their uniquely distinctive way, the Elvis way. And Phillips added like a jerry-rigged echo effect that he called slapback to the track. And the two songs were put together on either side of a disc, and their careers were on their way basically with these two songs. The next month, so in July of 1954, they started performing live. So first at the Bon Air Club, and then at the Overton Park Shell as the opener for Slim Whitman. And this performance was when Elvis pioneered his like rubber legs as his signature dance move. They kind of explained it as him feeling the music so much, but also like kind of a jittery, nervous effect. So he would dance around and do that rubber leg thing to he would keep him beat, but also shake off the nerves, literally. And not long after, Moore and Black left their old band and started playing with Presley regularly because they were getting popular. A disc jockey and promoter, Bob Neal, became the group's first manager, and Bob Neal actually introduced them to Parker later on. They became regulars at the local dance venues in Memphis, so they were constantly playing live shows, as many live shows as they could get. In October 1954, Elvis made his first and only appearance on Nashville's Grand Ole Opry stage. They said that he was not bad, but he wasn't what the Opry was used to showcasing. They definitely wanted more of like a country, almost like a hillbilly type sound, and Elvis is just not that. The next month, Elvis performed at Louisiana Hayride, which was Opry's competition, and that show was broadcast on 198 radio stations in 28 states, and it went over phenomenally. The Hayride was more adventurous than the Grand Ole Opry, and they signed Elvis for a year of Saturday night shows because they liked how adventurous he was as well. And they didn't really have a type that they were looking for necessarily. By 1955, with his appearances on Louisiana Hayride, his touring, and his record releases, Elvis Presley was a regional star. He was really on the rise to be somebody big. And he was booked on Hank Snow's tour starting in February of 1955. Elvis didn't fall into a certain category of music, so some of his songs were more country, others were more like R&B, jazzy, but the country DJs wouldn't play him because they thought he sounded too much like a black artist, and the R&B DJs wouldn't play him because they thought he sounded too much like a hillbilly. So his blend of music would become known as rockabilly. And at this time, he was referred to as the king of Western bop, the hillbilly cat, and the Memphis Flash. eventually like the king of rock and roll, right? Toward the end of 1955, a drummer, Fontana, joined the group as a full-time member, and so now they have a group of 4, and it kind of really rounded out their sound. Also during this time, he was voted the year's most promising male artist by the Country Disc Jockey Convention, and this caused many labels to make him offers, and he ended up striking a deal with RCA Victor for $40,000, which was a huge deal, and also they were the largest label in the country at the time.
Listen up, weed lovers. It's 420 month, and IndieCloud.co is here to elevate your celebration. Get a massive 42% off all weed, edibles, and vapes for the entire month of April in our biggest sale of the year. This is a special year to celebrate 420, as it marks 6 years since the sale of almost all cannabis products was legalized across the country. This allows IndieCloud to deliver to you dispensary-grade legal products discreetly delivered straight to your door. No medical card needed. IndieCloud has something for everyone. Whether you're a seasoned toker or just starting out, you can explore the world of weed safely with our award-winning Soda Shop Gummy Series, our 12 strains of flower, or our record-breaking selection of vapes. Celebrate 420 responsibly all April with IndieCloud. Discreet delivery, top shelf products, all month long. Head over to indiecloud.co/spring24, that's CO, not .com, to snag 42% off your first order. Summer is the season of hot temperatures, outdoor adventures, and refreshing water activities. Summer is also the season of rough on your feet, causing dry, cracked heels and toes. Introducing Babyfoot, the original exfoliation foot peel that contains 16 natural extracts formulated to remove dead skin cells in 3 easy steps. Apply the booties, relax for an hour, then wash your feet. In 14 days, you've got baby smooth skin and your feet have never been softer. Letting dead skin cells build up over time is hazardous to your foot health. Our professional-grade DIY products, like our original exfoliation foot peel, our men's foot peel, or our moisturizing mask, are some of the best foot care products on the market, created with your foot health in mind. Pamper yourself with a spa day from the comfort and convenience of your own home with Babyfoot. If you want a chemical-free, easy-to-use exfoliating process from the company that created the original foot peel, it's time to treat yourself to Babyfoot. Go to babyfoot.com and use the code SUMMERFEET24 and get 20% off your first order with Babyfoot. That's babyfoot.com and use the code SUMMERFEET24.
And by the way, Elvis was only 20 years old at this time, so he was legally still a minor. So his dad had to sign the contract, and his parents weren't super into his music career, especially his mom. She thought that he was kind of throwing his life away. But he was sold, or his dad was sold on the idea because he became like the financial advisor for Elvis Presley Enterprises. And as a star on the rise, 1956 saw a lot for Elvis. He started recording for RCA Victor, who brought in another guitarist and backup singers for the group to really, round out the sound even more, give it more, right? And he made 6 appearances on NBC's stage show. And since he was in New York for all those appearances, he recorded at RCA Victor's New York studio. He covered Carl Perkins' Blue Suede Shoes. He recorded I Forgot to Remember to Forget. His self-titled debut album came out on March 23rd, 1956. And it became the first rock and roll album to top the Billboard chart, and it held there for 10 weeks, which was a record. He continued to tour and make television appearances throughout that year. Like I said, 1956 was huge for him. And he had a 2-week residency. So it wasn't called a residency then. I'm just calling it a residency because I don't know what else to call it. In Las Vegas, but was poorly received by the middle-aged guests. And nobody wanted to see him. He was too new, too different, wasn't really anybody's scene. However, while he was there, he signed a 7-year contract with Paramount Pictures because he always wanted to be an actor as well as a singer. And he also attended several shows by Freddie Bell and the Bellboys while he was in Vegas. And they covered Hound Dog, which was a hit by blues singer Big Mama Thornton. And he liked that song so much that it became his closing number. But Elvis was having such an impact on the youths of the day that the FBI was warning people about him. So they warned that his actions and motions were such as to rouse the sexual passions of the teenage youth. In fact, Elvis received a lot of hate for his like grunt and groin antics. I don't know what that means, but he was moving his body too much and it was causing the young women to swoon. And it was so quote unquote out of control that a judge in Florida ordered him to tame his act. So people were freaking out. This was crazy for the time. People were just like weren't ready for what Elvis had to give them, but he really paved a path. He recorded Hound Dog, Any Way You Want Me, and Don't Be Cruel, and the single pairing of Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel topped the charts for 11 weeks. This record wouldn't be surpassed for 36 years. In September of 1956, Elvis appeared for the first time on The Ed Sullivan Show. Ed Sullivan wasn't super excited to have Elvis Presley on his show. And in fact, he wasn't even there. He was still recovering from a car accident he had, so somebody else was hosting the show. But they had him singing to this dog, literally a hound dog. And it was super embarrassing, but also it got him a lot of publicity, so he did it. But everyone was like pissed off because they were making a mockery of them, basically. And this show had approximately 60 million viewers. So you had all these people watching him sing to a hound dog. But they only shot Elvis from the waist up. And after seeing some of his other TV appearances, Sullivan stated Presley, quote, got some kind of device hanging down below the crotch of his pants. So when he moves his legs back and forth, you can see the outline of his cock. I think it's a Coke bottle. I can't have this on a Sunday night. This is a family show, end quote. So they were very concerned about his movements. So they did. They shot him singing to this dog, and they only shot him from the waist up, so that way you couldn't see his legs gyrating. But that night on the show, he performed Love Me Tender, which hadn't been released yet. So this prompted a record-shattering million advanced orders. He did return to the Ed Sullivan Show a month later, and Ed Sullivan was actually hosting at that time. And after that performance, crowds in Nashville and St. Louis were burning dummy replicas of Elvis. This symbolism, called effigy, is supposed to represent what the crowds wish that they could do to Elvis for his performances. So the world was much more conservative in the 50s, and Elvis was rocking the boat, like in a major way. Many people, they didn't like it. So they were like hanging these dummies, they were burning them, they were beating them as if they were actually Elvis to show that that's what they wanted to do to Elvis. And he started getting threats on his life around this time as well. Imagine that. To finish the year, his first motion picture came out, Love Me Tender, and he dropped into Sun Records because he no longer worked with Sun Records, while Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis were recording, and they had this impromptu jam session with Johnny Cash. So the four of them like had this cool little jam sesh, but Sam Phillips couldn't release it because he didn't have rights to Elvis Presley's music anymore. He couldn't release any Elvis material. So he hung on to that record of the four of them like hanging out because he recorded it naturally. And 25 years later, it was officially released and became known as the $1 Million Quartet. But this was Elvis's first year with RCA Victor, and he accounted for over 50% of the label's singles released that year and all the sales. But 1957 started a bit differently than 1956. So he started with a performance on the Ed Sullivan Show, but then received word from the draft board that he was classified 1A and most likely to be drafted later that year. I've heard a couple reasons for this. So either he was just drafted, because they were doing a draft, or he had the opportunity because he was causing such a ruckus in the country. He could either go to jail for his antics, or he could go to the army to be calmed down, basically. And since Colonel Parker was now his manager, he was like, go to the army. Just be like a good old-fashioned American hero. Come back a good American boy and do what you do. But go and show them that you can do what everyone else is doing. So Elvis did. We're not there yet. He hasn't been drafted yet. But in the first half of 1957, he released 3 singles, and they all went to number 1. You had Too Much, All Shook Up, and Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear. In March of 1957, he purchased his mansion in Memphis, Tennessee called Graceland. And that is where he's laid to rest and where Lisa Marie, his daughter, is also laid to rest. He recorded Loving You, the soundtrack for his next film. He also recorded sessions for Jailhouse Rock. Of course, the title track became a number one hit, and that was a movie. He also continued to tour because why not, right? Do a couple movies, do a couple tours, get your name out there. A newspaper in Detroit wrote, quote, "The trouble with going to see Elvis Presley is that you're liable to get killed," end quote. And in Philadelphia, people pelted the singer with eggs. And in Vancouver, the crowd rioted and destroyed the stage. So maybe the paper was right. That year, he released a Christmas album featuring Santa Claus is Back in Town. And as promised, Elvis received a draft notice on December 20th of 1957. He was going to war. I mean, he was still causing quite the stir. However, they did grant him a deferment to finish filming King Creole because he was right in the middle of filming the show, or the movie, excuse me. So they're like, we'll wait till the movie's done filming and then you'll go to war. On March 24th, 1958, Elvis Presley was drafted into the United States Army at Fort Chaffee in Arkansas. But Elvis was famous, so his arrival was like a huge thing. Hundreds of people showed up to watch him get off the bus and then go into the installation, which, let me tell you, is not like a fun experience because they're just yelling at you and you're scared. I don't know, maybe Elvis wasn't scared. I know when I went and they were yelling at me to get off the bus and yelling at me to go and do these things, I was a little scared. Anyway, he did say that he was looking forward to his military service and he didn't want to be treated any different than any of the other soldiers. He took 2 weeks of leave in June after basic training and recorded 5 songs while he was at home because he's Elvis Presley and he wants to sing. But in August, so he had gone back to training, his mom was diagnosed with hepatitis and she was getting bad quick. So he was granted emergency leave to be with her, and good thing too because she died on August 14th of 1958 of heart failure. And Elvis, being a mama's boy, he was completely devastated. And honestly, he was just never the same after that. He didn't know how to live in a world without his mom. But he had to go back to the army. And they stationed him in West Germany, where he served as an armor intelligence specialist. And while he was out there, he started to learn karate. And this actually would become a lifelong interest of his, martial arts. He incorporated it into a lot of the things that he did. In fact, he had Priscilla start taking karate lessons later on. But he was also super generous. He donated his entire paycheck to charity because he didn't need it. He was getting money and royalties from his music, and he purchased like television sets for the base, and even bought an extra set of fatigues, which is like a type of uniform, for everyone in his outfit. So he was just trying to like hang out with the guys, and they're like, cool, Elvis Presley is here. But he might have also been trying to prove himself a little bit, that he wasn't trying to be Elvis Presley, even though he was. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, while in Germany, Elvis, who was 24, met 14-year-old Priscilla Bolu. They wouldn't marry for 7.5 years, but I mean, that's a 10-year age gap. Priscilla revealed in her autobiography that Elvis was worried serving time in the military would ruin his career, but his manager, Parker, told him it would be better for him to act as a regular soldier than as a superstar. But his label had prepared for this, so they stored up songs and released periodically while he was serving, which resulted in 10 top 40 hits between the time he left for the Army and his discharge on March 5th, 1960. So after he was discharged, he took a train from New Jersey to Tennessee, and this train was just overrun with fans. So the train had to make scheduled stops along the way so that way he could say hi to his fans and like appease them. But Elvis, he didn't skip a beat. He was back in the recording studio just 15 days after his discharge, recording his new album with songs like Stuck on You. And the name of this album would be Elvis is Back, which makes total sense. He only performed one time that year in front of an audience, and that was on the Frank Sinatra Timex special. So his manager got him $125,000 for only 8 minutes of singing on this special. And that was completely unheard of at the time. But he was Elvis Presley, and people wanted to hear him. Also in 1960, he was in the movie and released the soundtrack for GI Blues. So this would kind of start him down a movie career path. We're not quite there yet. In 1961, he performed a couple shows in Memphis to benefit charities, but in March of that year, he recorded his next album, Something for Everybody. And it was much more Nashville sounding than Elvis's typical style, but I think that Parker was kind of trying to push him in that direction. Get him away from his style and more towards this normal style that people were used to hearing. On March 25th of 1961, Elvis performed a benefit concert for a Pearl Harbor Memorial in Hawaii. And this was his last public performance for 7 years because he instead started focusing on making films. He was starring in about 3 movies a year for several years in a row, and he was also doing the soundtracks for those movies, so he just couldn't keep up with his own music career. And honestly, he did this for much of the 60s. He mostly disliked the songs that he would sing for the soundtracks because they were written by people that didn't understand Elvis's style nor rock and roll. So it wasn't his cup of tea. But a couple of his biggest hits did come from his earlier films, such as Can't Help Falling in Love and Return to Sender. However, from 1964 to 1968, he only had one top 10 hit that wasn't from his soundtrack albums. So one song that he sang that was just a song, no movie associated. Just before Christmas of 1966, Elvis proposed to Priscilla when she was 21 and he was 31. So she was just legal because she was no longer a minor at 21. They got married May 1st, 1967 in the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. Also in 1967, he released a gospel album, How Great Thou Art, which won him his first Grammy. But it wouldn't be until the Clam Bake soundtrack had record low sales for an Elvis album that RCA Victor realized that they had a problem. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done. Basically, he looked like a joke to serious music lovers and a has-been to most of his loyal fans, so people didn't really care about Elvis Presley anymore. On February 1st, 1968, Lisa Marie Presley was born. She is Elvis's only child. He did he made another child with another woman, but that child was aborted without Elvis's he didn't even know that child was ever even around. Between January of 1967 and May of 1968, he had released 8 singles, with only 2 of them making the top 40, but neither of them made higher than number 28. So he kind of knew there was a problem. So Colonel Parker got him a deal with NBC for this Christmas special called Elvis, and it aired December 3rd of 1968. But it wasn't going to be what Colonel Parker expected it to be. So he promised NBC this Christmas special. Elvis wanted to use this as a comeback. There was a small audience, and this was his first live show since 1961. But this special would become known as the 68 Comeback Special because that's exactly what he did. He dressed in this tight black leather get up, and he refound himself during the show. He sang all his songs. He did everything that he wanted to do. He went back to his dancing. He wanted to be Elvis Presley again. In June of 1969, he released From Elvis in Memphis, which people described as a masterpiece. And Elvis was itching to get back to regular live performing. He was basically done with making movies. He wanted to just be the music side of Elvis. And he wanted a world tour, and it seemed like everyone on his team was up for it except for Colonel Parker. Parker told him that it would be really expensive for Elvis Presley Enterprises to put on a tour like that, and highly discouraged him from doing this world tour. Instead, Parker suggested that he do something where someone else would flip the bill, like go perform in Vegas. Starting July 31st of 1969, he was booked for 57 shows in 4 weeks at this brand new international hotel. It was called International, in Las Vegas. Elvis was kind of nervous because the last time he had like a residency, quote unquote, in Vegas, it really wasn't received well. But everyone worked really hard this time to make sure that this residency was going to be way better than the last. And it was. It was huge. His very first show had 2,200 people in the audience, and many of them were celebrities coming to see him. And during this performance, he received 3 standing ovations. And after the show, during an interview, he was referred to as the King. His manager, while he was up on stage, negotiated with the hotel owner and got Elvis a 5-year contract to play each February and August for an annual salary of $1 million. But what Elvis didn't know was that Parker was deep in the hole at the Las Vegas casinos. And this contract helped Parker more than it helped Elvis, honestly. But Parker was like a gambling addict. So he had all these issues. So he needed all of his debt wiped from the casinos, but also now he had this unlimited credit while Elvis was performing there. So by 1970, Elvis was fully back. He would go to the International Hotel for his 2-month-long stints, and several of the shows were recorded and issued on the album On Stage. He had record-breaking shows at the Houston Astrodome. MGM filmed footage of his rehearsals and concerts for their documentary Elvis, That's the Way It Is. He was performing in his signature jumpsuit, and this became his trademark for his live acts. While at his August residency in 1970, he was threatened with murder unless he paid $50,000. This wasn't the first time. Like I mentioned earlier, his life had been threatened so many times since the 1950s. Sometimes he knew about it, sometimes he didn't. But the FBI took this threat super seriously. They upped the security for the next couple shows, and Elvis went on stage with a Derringer in his boot and a .45 in his waistband. Luckily, the concerts went on without a hitch. But after the engagement was over that year, he went on a couple week-long tours, ended the year with a meeting at the White House with President Richard Nixon. He told Nixon that he could help reach the hippies and help combat the drug culture. When we get into the conspiracies, we're going to get into that meeting a little bit more. In 1971, this was the year of achievements, basically, for Presley. So he was named one of the 10 most outstanding young men of the nation by the U.S. Junior Chamber of Commerce. The city of Memphis named a stretch of Highway 51 south after him. This was the same stretch of highway that Graceland was on. And he was the first rock and roll singer to be awarded a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. In 1972, MGM filmed Elvis on Tour, which won the Golden Globe Award for the best documentary film that year. And he won his second Grammy for his gospel album, He Touched Me. A 14-date tour was scheduled, with 4 of the dates being consecutive sold-out shows at Madison Square Garden. And they recorded one of the nights, and this became his biggest-selling album ever. He released Burning Love after his tour was over, and all the while, his marriage was collapsing. Him and Priscilla were not doing well, even though it seemed like Elvis was on top of the world. In February of 1972, they separated. They were both seeing someone else on the side anyway, so I don't know, it kind of seemed like this was coming. They officially filed for divorce in August of that year. They didn't officially divorce until later. But also, Sometime during all of this, he wanted to leave Parker as his manager as well. He didn't want to continue to do shows in Vegas. He still wanted to do so much more. He wanted to go on a world tour. He wanted to do bigger things. So when he approached Parker about this, they were told that Elvis Presley Enterprises owed Parker's company over $8 million. So this would have bankrupted Elvis Presley Enterprises. They would have been left with nothing. Parker Elvis didn't know this at the time. So Parker wasn't an American citizen until he joined the army as like this younger guy. He wasn't a person as far as anyone was really concerned. I honestly don't think that Parker would have pursued it because he was using Elvis for the money. So had Elvis left, he wouldn't have pursued the $8 million because who was Parker, right? But I think that he used this as a scare tactic, and it worked because Elvis stayed with him. In January of 1973, he performed 2 benefit concerts for the Kui Lee Cancer Fund in connection with his TV special Aloha from Hawaii. And this TV special was broadcast all over the world. So he was seen in Japan, South Korea, Thailand, the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand the first night. The next night, he was shown in 28 European countries. And in April, the extended version was aired in the US. So this was Parker's way of giving Elvis his world tour. And of course, he put out an album to accompany this performance, and it sold over 5 million copies, and this was his last US #1 pop album during his lifetime. Elvis's health had started to seriously decline during this year as well, and he had overdosed on sleeping pills twice. His divorce was finalized on October 9th of 1973, and later that year he was hospitalized after the effects of a pethidine addiction. And they told the public it was because of exhaustion. What is interesting is 1973 was his busiest year that he had ever seen. So he had 168 concerts that year because he was doing 2 concerts a night when he was in Vegas. However, despite his failing health, he took on even more for 1974, but he would take the stage way too fucked up to perform on some occasions and made no official recordings in 1974. He wasn't happy. He was living this life because he felt like he had to, but he was super unhappy, which is why he started taking more drugs, why he didn't care how he looked on stage anymore. He wasn't really having fun with life anymore. They did manage to get a concert record Elvis recorded live on stage in Memphis. And he did win his 3rd and final Grammy because he performed his gospel hit, How Great Thou Art. Just for funsies, like a fun fact, he only received Grammys for his gospel albums. He never received Grammys for his rock and roll or any of his hits. Finally, in March of 1975, he did return to the studio to record again. And in 1976, RCA sent a mobile studio to Graceland, which made 2 full-scale recording sessions possible because he wasn't leaving his house anymore. But by this time, recording just didn't come easy anymore, and the number of drugs he was taking probably didn't help. By 1977, he was just a shell of the man he used to be. He was super overweight. He could barely pull himself together enough for his shows at the International. Surprisingly, he kept most of his touring commitments that year, but his performances were awful. He did have to reschedule a couple of them, but he would go back for when it was rescheduled. He did perform. He wasn't doing great. He wasn't working. He was basically confined himself to a room. He was scared of all these hits that he felt like were out in his life. On August 16th of 1977, Elvis was scheduled on an evening flight out of Memphis, headed for Portland, Maine, to start another tour. A few hours before his flight, his fiancée girlfriend, Ginger Alden, found him on the bathroom floor of his home. He was 42 years old. The cause of his death has been volleyed back and forth. Was it drugs? Was it not? Nobody seems to really agree. Initially, they ruled it cardiac arrest and the drugs playing no part in his death. Then they said the drugs had everything to do with his death. At some point, they said that he was just straining too hard on the toilet and that caused a heart attack, which does happen occasionally. In 1994, they did another autopsy and found that drugs were not the cause and it was just a really violent heart attack. I don't know. But mid-August 1977, Elvis Presley was dead. But what if he didn't die? What if his death was the only way he saw to get out from underneath Parker's thumb? Because Parker was just draining him financially. He was using him for money left and right. And he kept him under his thumb as long as he possibly could to keep getting those benefits at the hotels, at the casinos, to keep benefiting from his music career financially. Almost as soon as Elvis died, people started seeing him just all over the place. They're like, oh, look, there's Elvis. He's not dead. When Elvis met President Nixon, he was sworn in as a federal agent at large. So this is how he helped with the drug problem. He was working undercover with the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. This seems far-fetched, but Elvis wrote a letter to Nixon explaining that he wanted to help and that he could help better than most because the hippies and the Black Panthers and other such groups and organizations, they didn't see Elvis as part of the establishment because he went against the mainstream music culture. So they liked him because he went against the mainstream so much. So they wouldn't suspect that he was working for the government. Elvis also mentioned that he was worried about communism brainwashing the youth of America and wanted to help put an end to that as well. So President Nixon scheduled a meeting for Elvis for the very same day that he had received the letters from him. This lends credibility to the fact that Nixon thought Elvis could be helpful. He was incredibly helpful, in fact. He gave information to the FBI that led to the takedown of some pretty big names, like big mafia members. Basically, Elvis wanted to sell one of his planes. He had had multiple planes throughout his time. One of the planes he didn't need anymore. He's like, go ahead and sell that. It didn't even fly. Well, someone came to Elvis Presley Enterprises and got them to sign over this elaborate rental agreement. Basically, this third party would rent out the planes for Elvis Enterprises. And the third party was actually the mafia, and they were skimming a lot of money off the top of this rental agreement. And this is how Elvis helped to catch the mobsters. But towards the end, this is why there were so many threats on his life, because the mob put a hit out on him. That's also why he became so paranoid in his last years of life. He was hardly leaving his room. He would almost never leave Graceland at all because he thought that he would be murdered. And several times while he was performing in Vegas, people stormed the stage or threatened him. One time he even karate kicked one guy off the stage while his security team tackled the other guys that were also storming the stage. Pretty crazy. But by mid-August 1977, the FBI was ready to take the information that they had gotten, that they had all gathered. They were going to go to a grand jury. It's assumed that Elvis was going to testify, but this is right about the same time that Elvis Presley died. Or he was placed into witness protection. And that's why they couldn't decide on his manner of death, because the U.S. Department of Justice made it all up to save his life. So they announced his manner of death before the autopsy was ever conducted. So that very first manner of death, where they're like, yeah, it was cardiac arrest, drugs weren't involved at all. They hadn't even done an autopsy yet, so they couldn't really identify that. Then the coroner decided that it was something different, so it did have something to do with the drugs. And that's what kind of started this back and forth. But his autopsy has never been made public, so it's not like we can just look at it and be like, oh yeah. Or we can just give it to another professional to have them look it over. It's not public information. It's rumored that the autopsy reported his weight as 170 pounds, but he had gained a lot of weight towards the end of his life, so he actually weighed closer to 150 pounds at the time. So I'm wondering, there's a couple different things I'm wondering with this. Did they give the coroner the wrong body just so that they could do an exam and shoot this guy up with a bunch of drugs? Because the coroner did report that there was about 8 different drugs in this body's system. Whether it was Elvis or somebody else, unclear. They went as far as to put a wax dummy in the open casket, so when people went through for the viewing, this is what they were seeing. And people believed it. Because I don't know if you've ever seen somebody in a viewing like that, but they don't look like they did when they were alive. So putting a wax dummy in there, which would look very different than what Elvis Presley would have looked like alive, that doesn't raise that many red flags, just because all the chemicals and stuff they put into bodies after they die, they don't look human anymore. But it did seem like the pallbearers were having a really hard time lifting this casket. There is something between like 8 and 12 pallbearers. I've seen different numbers reported, so I don't want to say specifically how many there were, but it seemed like these 12 people were having a really hard time carrying this casket. But that's because there was a cooling system in it. So along with this wax dummy, they had to keep this cooling system in the casket to keep this wax dummy from melting in the Tennessee heat. And the dummy actually looked more like a younger version and a slimmer version of Elvis than what he would have looked like at the time when he died. And it looked like they had given Elvis this pug nose, which Elvis didn't have a pug nose. And the hands of this dummy or this person, whoever was in this casket, they were really smooth, which sounds weird, right? But after years of martial arts and guitar playing, Elvis's hands would have been very calloused, not smooth at all. In fact, 200 to 300 people reported seeing beads of sweat on Elvis Presley in his casket. We all know that dead men do not sweat, but wax does. And what's strange is about a month before his apparent death, he took out a loan on Graceland. And right after his death, his accounts were completely drained. Now, you could point to a number of people and be like, oh, they drained his accounts, right? But his life insurance policy was never cashed, which if people are draining his accounts, they're going to go after his life insurance as well, especially if he's that blatantly dead, right? Like, this was televised. A bunch of people came to his viewing and to see him be buried. Like, this was a big deal. So why would they not cash in on his life insurance? Well, it is fraud to cash in on life insurance policies when the people are still living. So maybe he didn't die. After his death, someone was running his credit for a loan. So the person that came up when you looked at who was running his credit was named John Burroughs. John Burroughs was a known alias of Elvis because he used that name all the time when he would check into hotels and he didn't want people to know that Elvis Presley was in this hotel. He would use the name John Burroughs. However, he did remain in contact with his family, but only on occasion. He didn't want to risk his daughter's life, so he would reach out and talk to them every now and then, but he basically stayed away. Some people believed that he would come back into the spotlight because they believed that he did fake his death, but obviously we know that that never happened. But there have been several sightings of him. Most notable, in my opinion, and like I said, there have been a lot, so you can look these up all over the place. This man was calling himself Bob Joyce. And Bob attended Lisa Marie's funeral. Lisa Marie died on January 12th of 2023 at the age of 54. If Elvis was still alive, he would have been 88. So totally reasonable for him to have been at his daughter's funeral. This Bob guy looks an awful lot like Elvis, had he gotten very old, right? 88. And he also had a lot of his same mannerisms. But what really gets me is his singing. When I heard him sing, he sounds just like an older version of Elvis. Similar, like you can hear, if you listen to like a Johnny Cash album, you hear him when he's young, he sounds like a young Johnny Cash. Then he gets older, he's still singing, but you can tell that he has aged. This guy sounds like Elvis, but has aged. And if he sang an Elvis song and you didn't know like who was singing it, you honestly would have thought that it was Elvis singing this song. And he was singing at Lisa Marie's funeral. Coincidence? I don't know. We all know that I don't believe in coincidences. I did link this video in my show notes. It's the Instagram link, and I'll also share it on Instagram, so you guys can go check it out there if you want. But there are a couple other things. So right after his death, there was a black helicopter spotted leaving Graceland, like shortly after his death, after he was reported dead and everyone had come to like figure out what was going on. This helicopter was seen leaving. And there are pictures circulating that show a man that look an awful lot like Elvis boarding this black helicopter the same day he was found dead. Also, his tombstone reads Elvis Aaron Presley, with Aaron being spelled Aaron. But on his birth certificate, his middle name was spelled Aron. And this may have been done because he didn't die. So when he does actually die, he would put his real name on his tombstone. Last thing is that he was a veteran. So he would have had an American flag laying over his casket, and they would have played taps. They would have done a 21 gun salute, but none of that happened. But if he wasn't dead, maybe he wanted to save those honors for when he was actually dead. But why would he fake his own death? I mean, we already kind of went over the Parker situation. But also, he was super famous. If he wanted to go see a movie, he had to rent out the entire theater. If he wanted to take his daughter out for like her birthday or ice cream or something, he had to rent out the entire place. He needed security. He was scared for his life constantly because his life was always in danger. People were always like throwing things at him, threatening his life. They did not like him, but also they loved him, which caused some serious issues in his life as well. But at the end of the day, Elvis loved his daughter, and he wouldn't have done anything to put her in harm's way. He would have done anything to keep her safe. So I think that whatever is the truth, if he did fake his death, he did it ultimately to keep his daughter safe. But I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Do you think that Elvis lived or is still alive potentially? Or do you think he's dead? Do you think he died that day and we just are hopeful that maybe he kept on living because we want to believe in something like that? Let me know. Until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I'll see you all then.